Walk 2 Moons, Set 7, chapters 24 through 28. Birds of Sadness. As we were leaving the Badlands, Gramps swore at a driver who cut us off. Usually when Gramps cussed like this, Graham threatened to go back to the Eggman. I don't know that whole story. Just that one time when Gramps was cussing up a storm, Graham ran off with the man who regularly bought eggs from Gramps. Graham stayed with the Eggman for 3 days and 3 nights until Gramps came to get her and promised that he wouldn't swear any more. I once asked Graham if she would really go back to the Eggman if Gramps cussed too much. She said, "Don't tell your grandfather, but I don't mind a few hells and damns. Besides, that Eggman snored to beat the band." So you didn't leave Gramps just because of the cussing? Salamanca, I don't even remember why I did that. Sometimes, in your heart you love someone, but you have to go away before your head can figure it out. That night, we stayed at a motel outside of Wall, South Dakota. They had one room left, with only one bed in it. But Gramps was tired, so he said it would do. The bed was a king-size water bed. "Gold dang," Gramps said. "Looky there." When he pressed his hand on it, it gurgled. "Looks like we'll all have to float on this raft together tonight." Graham flopped down on the bed and giggled. "Hus, hus," she said in her raspy voice. She rolled into the middle. "Hus, hus." I lay down next to her, and Gramps tentatively sat down on the other side. "Whoa," he said. "I do believe this thing's alive." The three of us lay there sloshing around as Gramps turned this way and that. "Oh, dang," he said. Tears were streaming down Gramps' face. She was giggling so hard. Gramps said, "Well, this ain't our wedding bed." That night I dreamed I was floating down a river on a raft with my mother. We were lying on our backs looking up at the high sky. The sky moved closer and Front lawn and a pile of leaves was Tommy, and Dougie and Ben was sitting on the porch. I sat down beside him while Phoebe went looking for Mary Lou. Ben said, "Phoebe's driving you crazy, isn't she?" "I like the way he looked right in your eyes when he talked to you." "Extensively," I said. "I bet Phoebe is lonely." Now, I don't know what came over me, but I almost reached up and touched his face. My heart was thumping so loudly that I thought that he would be able to hear it. I went into the house. From the back window I watched Mrs. Feeney climb a ladder placed against the garage. On the roof she took off her jacket and spread it out. A few minutes later Mr. Feeney came around the back of the house and climbed up the ladder. He took off his jacket and spread it out next to her. He lay down on the roof and put his arm around her. He kissed her. On the roof, in the wide open air, they lay there kissing each other. It made me feel peculiar. They reminded me of my parents before the stillborn baby, before the operation. Ben came into the kitchen. As he reached into the cupboard for a glass, he stopped and looked at me. Again, I had that odd sensation that I wanted to touch his face right there on his cheek in that soft spot. I was afraid my hand might just lift up and drift over to him if I was not careful. It was most peculiar. "Guess where Mary Lou is?" Phoebe said when she came in. "She's with Alex on a date." I had never been on a date. Neither, I assumed, had Phoebe. That night at my house, I pulled the sleeping bag out of the closet and spread it on the floor. Phoebe looked at it as if it were a spider. "Don't worry," I said. "I'll sleep in it." I crawled in, pretending to fall asleep immediately. I heard Phoebe get into bed. A little later, my father came into the room. "Phoebe," he said, "something the matter?" "No," she said. "Oh, I thought I heard someone crying. Are you okay?" "Yes," she said. "Are you sure?" "Yes." I felt bad for Phoebe. I knew I should get up and try to be nice, but I remember when I'd felt like that, and I knew that sometimes you just wanted to be alone with the birds of sadness. Sometimes you had to cry by yourself. That night I dreamed that I was sitting on the grass, peering through a pair of binoculars. Far off in the distance, my mother was climbing up a ladder. She kept climbing and climbing. It was a thumpingly tall ladder. She couldn't see me, and she never came down. She just kept on going. Pandora's box. The next day, as I was helping Phoebe lug her suitcase home, I said, "Phoebe, I know you've been upset lately." "I have not been upset lately," she said. "Sometimes, Phoebe, I like you a lot." "Why, thank you." "But sometimes, Phoebe, I feel like dumping your cholesterol-free body out the window." She did not have a chance to respond because we were at her house and she was more interested in besieging my father with questions. "Any news? Did Mom come back? Did she call?" "Sort of," he said. "She phoned Mrs. Cadaver." "Mrs. Cadaver? Whatever for? Why would she—" "Phoebe, calm down. I don't know why she phoned Mrs. Cadaver. I haven't been able to speak to Mrs. Cadaver myself yet. She isn't home. She left a note here." He showed it to Phoebe. "Norma called to say she is okay." Beneath Mrs. Cadaver's signature was a P.S. saying that Mrs. Cadaver would be away until Monday. "I don't believe that Mom called Mrs. Cadaver. Mrs. Cadaver is making it up. Mrs. Cadaver probably killed her and chopped her up. I'm calling the police." They had a huge argument, but at last Phoebe fizzled out. Her father said he had been calling everyone he could think of to see if her mother had indicated where she might be going. He would continue calling tomorrow, he promised, and he would speak with Mrs. Cadaver. If he did not receive a letter or a direct phone call from her mother by Wednesday, he would call the police. Phoebe came out on the porch with me as I was leaving. She said, "I've made a decision. I'm going to call the police. I might even go to the police station. I don't have to wait until Wednesday. I can go whenever I want." That night she phoned me. She was whispering again. "It seems so quiet here. I don't know what is the matter with me. I was lying on my bed and I can't sleep. My bed's too hard." On Monday, Phoebe gave her oral report on Pandora. She began in a quivering voice. For some reason, Ben already talked about my topic, Pandora, when he did this report on Prometheus. However, Ben made a few little mistakes about Pandora. Everyone turned around to stare at Ben. I did not, he said. Yes, you did. Phoebe's lip trembled. Pandora was not sent to man as a punishment, but as a reward. Was not, Ben said. Was too, Phoebe said. Zeus decided to give man a present, since man seemed lonely down here on earth, with only the animals to keep him company. So Zeus made a sweet and beautiful woman, and then Zeus invited all the gods to dinner. It was a very civilized dinner with matching plates. Mary Lou and Ben exchanged an eyebrow message. Zeus asked the gods to give the woman presents to make him feel like a welcomed guest. Phoebe glanced at me. They gave her wonderful things, a fancy shawl, a silver dress, beauty. Ben interrupted. I thought you said she was already beautiful. They gave her more beauty. Are you satisfied? Her lips were no longer trembling, but she was blushing. The gods also gave her the ability to sing, the power of persuasion, a gold crown, flowers, and many truly wonderful things such as that. Because all of these gifts, Zeus named her Pandora, which means the gift of all. Phoebe was getting into it. There were two other gifts that I have not mentioned yet. One of them was curiosity. That is why all women are curious, by the way, because it was a gift given to the very first woman. Ben said, I wish he had been given the gift of silence. Last, there was a beautiful box covered in gold and jewels, and this is very important. She was forbidden to open the box. Ben said, then why did they give it to her? He was beginning to irritate Phoebe. You could tell. She said, that's what I'm telling you. It was a present. But why did they give her a present that she couldn't open? I do not know. It's just in the story. As I was saying, Pandora was not supposed to open the box, but because she had been given so much curiosity, she really, really, really wanted to know what was inside. So one day, she opened the box. I knew it, Ben said. I knew she was going to open the box the minute that you said that she was not supposed to open it. Inside the box were all the evils in the world, such as hatred, envy, plagues, sickness, and cholesterol. There were brain tumors and sadness, lunatics and kidnappings and murderers. She glanced at Mr. Berkway before rushing on. And all that kind of thing. Pandora tried to close the lid when she saw all the horrible things that were coming out of it, but she could not get it closed, and that is why there are all these evils in the world. There was only one good thing in the box. What was it? Ben asked. It was about, as I was about to explain, the only good thing in the box was hope, and that is why, even though there are many evils in the world, there is still a little hope. She held up a picture of Pandora opening up the box and a whole shebang of gremlins floating out. Pandora looked frightened. That night I kept thinking about Pandora's box. I wonder why someone would put a good thing such as hope in a box with sickness and kidnapping and murder. It was fortunate that it was there, though. If not, people would have the birds of sadness nesting in their hair all the time because of nuclear war and the greenhouse effect and bombs and stabbings and lunatics. There must have been another box with all good things in it, like sunshine and love and trees and all that. Who had the good fortune to open that one? And was there one bad thing down there in the bottom of the good box? Maybe it was worry. Even when everything seems fine and good, I worry that something will go wrong and change everything. My mother, my father, and I all seemed fine and happy at our house until the baby died. Could you actually say that the baby died since it had never breathed? Did its birth and death occur at the same moment? Could you die before you were born? Phoebe's family had not seemed fine, even before the arrival of the lunatic and the messengers and the disappearance of Mrs. Winterbottom. I knew that Phoebe was convinced that her mother was kidnapped because it was impossible for Phoebe to imagine that her mother would leave for any other reason. I wanted to call Phoebe and say that maybe her mother had gone looking for something. Maybe her mother was unhappy. Maybe there was nothing Phoebe could do about it. When I told this part to Grandma Gramps, Gramps said, "You mean it had nothing to do with Phoebe?" They looked at each other. They didn't say anything, but there was something in that look that suggested I had just said something important. For the first time, it occurred to me that maybe my mother's leaving had nothing whatsoever to do with me. It was separate and apart. We couldn't own our mothers. On that night, after Phoebe had given Pandora's report, I thought about the hope in Pandora's box. Maybe when everything seemed sad and miserable, Phoebe and I could both hope that something might start to be right. The Black Hills. When we saw the first sign for the Black Hills, the whispers changed and once again commanded, "Rush, hurry, rush." We had spent too long in South Dakota. There were only 2 days left and a long way to go. "Maybe we should skip the Black Hills," I said. "What?" Grim said. "Skip the Black Hills? Skip Mount Rushmore? We can't do that." "But today is the 18th. It's the 5th day." "Do we have a deadline someone didn't tell me about?" Gramps asked. "Heck, we've got all the time in the—" Graham gave him a look. "I've just got to see these Black Hills," Gramps said. "We'll be quick about it, Chickabiddy." The whispers walloped me. Rush, rush, rush. I knew that we wouldn't make it to Idaho in time. I thought about sneaking off while Grandma Gramps were looking at the Black Hills. Maybe I could hitch a ride with someone who drove fast. But the thought of someone speeding, careening around curves, especially the snaking curves down at Lewiston, Idaho, which I had heard so much about, when I thought about that, it made me dizzy and sick. "Heck," Gramps said, "I ought to turn this wheel over to you, Chickabiddy. All this driving is making me crazy as a loon." He was only joking, but he knew I could drive. He had taught me to drive his old pickup truck when I was 11. We used to ride around on the dirt roads on their farm. I drove, and he smoked his pipe and told stories. He said, "You're a hell of a driver, Chickabiddy, but don't you tell your mama I taught you. She'd thrash me half to death." I used to love to drive that old green pickup truck. I dreamed about turning 16 and getting my license. But then when Mama left, something happened to me. I became afraid of things, and I had never been afraid of before, and driving was one of these things. I didn't even like to ride in cars, let alone drive a truck. The Black Hills were not really black. Pines covered the hills, and maybe at dusk they looked black, but when we saw them at midday, they were dark green. It was an eerie sight. All those rolling dark hills. A cool wind blew down through the pines, and the trees switched secrets among them. My mother had always wanted to see the Black Hills. It was one of the sights that she was most looking forward to on her trip. She used to tell me about the Black Hills, which was sacred to the Sioux Indians. It was their holy land, but white settlers took it as their own. The Sioux were still fighting for their land. I half expected a Sioux to stop our car from entering, and the thing is, I would have been on his side. I would have said, "Take it, it's yours." We drove through the Black Hills to Mount Rushmore. At first we didn't think we were in the right place, but then, jing bang, it was right before us. There, high up on a cliff face, were the 60-foot tall faces of Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln, and Teddy Roosevelt, carved right into the rock, staring somberly down at us. It was fine seeing the presidents. I've got nothing against the presidents, but you'd think the Sioux would be mighty sad to have those white faces carved into their sacred hill. I bet my mother was upset. I wonder why whoever carved them couldn't have put a couple of Indians up there too. Graham seemed disappointed as well. Graham didn't even want to get out of the car, so we didn't stay long. Graham said, "I've had enough of South Dakota. How about you, Chickabiddy? How about you, Gooseberry? Let's get on a move on." So late afternoon, we were well into Wyoming, and I added up the miles left to go. Maybe we could make it, just maybe. Then Gramps said, I hope nobody minds if we stop at Yellowstone. It'd be a sin to miss Yellowstone, Graham said. Is that where Old Faithful is? Oh, I would love to see Old Faithful. She looked back at me. We'll hurry. Why, I bet we'll be in Idaho by the 20th without any problem at all. Time for your questions for step 7.